The pen hit the table softly, not thrown, not slammed, just placed down with the kind of deliberate calm that is far more frightening than rage. Prince stood up, buttoned his jacket, and looked at the three men sitting across the conference table in that tower above Midtown Manhattan. They had flown him here, rented this room, ordered the water with the label facing outward, and they had just said no, not no to a demand. No to every single demand, all at once, as if reading from a pre-written script. The package price is too high. The exclusivity window is too narrow. The veto clause over advertising content is unprecedented. The timeline is unworkable. We appreciate your vision, but this is not how deals are structured. Prince said nothing. He picked up his jacket, nodded once, not politely, not coldly, just once, and walked to the door. His manager, standing near the wall, looked at him with wide eyes. The target executives exchanged glances. Someone started to say something. The door was already closing. In the elevator going down, his manager spoke first. "Prince, we don't have another buyer lined up. iTunes said no to the exclusivity. Amazon said no to the price. We've been through this." Prince watched the floor numbers descend. "Then we wait," he said. "For what?" "For them to remember that no one else has what I have." The elevator hit the lobby. Prince walked into the cold February air of New York City, 2009, looking for a moment like just another man in a purple coat. But the music industry had made the mistake of thinking he was ordinary before. That mistake had cost people their careers. What the men in that conference room did not understand, what almost no one understood, was that Prince had been in this exact position before. Not in a Manhattan tower, in a different kind of room, 15 years earlier, when the people who owned his name told him what he could and could not do. And back then, he had written the word slave on his face, not as a stunt, as a testimony. It was 1993 when he first understood the full shape of the trap. He had signed with Warner Brothers Records at 19 years old. A contract that made sense when you were a teenager from Minneapolis who just wanted the world to hear what was inside him. A deal that gave him money, distribution, a platform, and in exchange, it gave Warner Brothers ownership of his masters, control over his release schedule, and the legal right to delay, shelve, or reshape his music at will. For a decade, he had worked within those walls, and the walls had produced genius. 1999, Purple Rain, Sign of the Times, Love Sexy, Diamonds and Pearls. Albums that had defined eras. Albums that other artists built careers trying to imitate. But the music belonged to the corporation. And the corporation, increasingly, was telling him what a Prince album should sound like, how long it should be, when it should come out, and what it should cost. He was the most creative musician of his generation, and he was an employee. The moment of rupture came quietly. He walked into a meeting, asked for the rights to his masters, and was told that was not on the table. He walked out and never signed another contract with Warner Brothers. But the damage was already calcified inside him. A permanent understanding of what it meant to build something with your own hands and hand the deed to someone else. He had spent years in legal battles, changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol, released music through unconventional channels, given albums away with concert tickets, performed on television with slave written across his cheekbone. Every move had been called eccentric. Every move had been, in fact, precise. By 2008, the music industry was collapsing, and Prince was watching it with something close to satisfaction. CD sales had fallen off a cliff. The major labels were in freefall, cutting rosters, closing divisions, begging artists they had once controlled to come back on any terms. Digital downloads had made iTunes the de facto gatekeeper, which meant Steve Jobs had inherited the power once held by label executives. The power to determine how music was packaged, priced, and distributed. The box had simply changed hands. Prince had no interest in climbing inside it again. He had been working on Lotus Flow 3R for months at Paisley Park, his studio compound outside Minneapolis. 3 discs, 36 tracks, one coherent artistic statement. Lush, funky, spiritual, impossible to categorize. Exactly the kind of work that made marketing departments sweat. His assistant had brought up the obvious question one afternoon while they were going over the release logistics. "What about digital? Even a limited window? Prince was playing bass idly, not looking up. iTunes gives you 70 cents on the dollar and calls it generous. And then they own the relationship with the customer. The customer buys from iTunes. They don't buy from me. He set the bass down. I'm not building someone else's kingdom again. The plan, when it crystallized, was audacious to the point of appearing delusional. He would release Lotus Flow 3R exclusively through a single retail partner. No digital downloads, no streaming, no secondary market. One retailer, physical copies only, for a limited window. The price would be higher than standard. The packaging would be premium. And whoever the retail partner was, they would agree to his terms. His promotional timeline, his advertising content, his creative control, or there would be no deal at all. His team prepared the terms document like a military briefing. 5 non-negotiable conditions: fixed album pricing at $11.98 for 3 discs, prominent in-store placement for 6 weeks, Prince's personal approval on all television advertising, 6 months of exclusivity with no extension, and 1 promotional appearance on Prince's terms. Nothing subject to revision. The meeting with Target had been arranged through intermediaries who assured both sides that the deal was essentially done. Prince had agreed to meet. Target had agreed to listen. Everyone assumed the details were formalities. They were not formalities. The 3 Target executives, VP of Marketing, Head of Music and Entertainment, and a corporate attorney, had reviewed the terms document the night before and had come to the meeting with a counter-proposal. Their counter-proposal changed 4 of the 5 conditions. The only thing they hadn't touched was the price. Prince sat across from them and listened to their counter-proposal with complete stillness. Then he asked one question. "Which of my 5 points do you agree with?" The attorney looked down at his notes. "The pricing structure is acceptable." Prince picked up the pen that had been sitting beside the document. He drew a single line through the other 4 items. "Then we don't have an agreement." He set the pen down. He left. The 48 hours that followed were the longest his team had endured in years. His manager worked the phones relentlessly, trying to gauge whether Target would reconsider or whether they needed to approach another retailer. Walmart had previously expressed interest but had balked at the veto clause. Best Buy was a possibility, but their music division was contracting. There was no clean backup option, and Prince was at Paisley Park, unreachable. Not unreachable because he had gone dark. Unreachable because he was in the studio. His engineer, who had worked with him for 11 years, said later that those 2 days were unlike anything he had witnessed. Prince came in the first morning and played piano for 4 hours without stopping, not recording, not composing for the project. Just playing. Bach. Monk. His own half-finished things from years ago. The engineer sat outside the live room and listened through the glass and understood that he was watching a man hold himself together through the only language that had never failed him. On the second night, around 2 in the morning, Prince called him into the room. He was sitting at the piano, hands in his lap. "Do you think I made a mistake?" the engineer asked him to clarify. "Leaving the meeting?" The engineer thought about it. He knew better than to say something comforting. "No," he said finally. "I think they made a mistake." Prince looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, turned back to the piano, and started playing again. The call came the next afternoon. Minneapolis area code on an incoming New York number. His manager picked up first, then found Prince in the control room and held out the phone. "It's Target, the VP." Prince looked at the phone, did not reach for it immediately. Let it sit in his manager's hand for a moment. Not as theater, but as something more considered. Then he took it. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. The VP of Marketing did most of the talking. Target had reviewed the terms again. There had been additional discussions at the executive level. They believed the partnership had significant value. They were prepared to accept the conditions as originally presented. All 5. Prince asked one question. "Has anything changed in the document I sent?" "No," the VP said. "Nothing has changed." "Then we have a deal," Prince said. And that was the entire conversation. The contract signing happened 3 days later in the same conference room. The same executives. The same water with labels facing outward. This time the document on the table was Prince's original 5-point terms, unchanged. He read every word despite having written it himself. Then he signed, shook hands once with each person, and left. His manager caught a glimpse of the lead executive's expression on the way out. It was not resentment. It was something closer to respect. What no one outside that inner circle ever saw was the handwritten note Prince left on the studio whiteboard during those 48 hours. His engineer found it the morning after the deal was signed and photographed it before erasing it per standing instruction. It read, in Prince's distinctive compact handwriting, "The moment you negotiate against yourself, you've already lost. Hold the line. The right people always call back." The advertising shoot happened in March. The director had prepared 17 setups. Prince returned the list with 7 marked through and a note. "The camera follows me. I don't follow the camera." They rewrote the shot list, shot the commercial in one day. It aired in April and looked unlike anything else on television. Prince moving through the frame as though the camera were a guest in his world. Lotus Flow 3R was released on March the 29th, 2009, exclusively through Target stores across the United States. In its first week, it sold 158,000 copies. It debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200. No iTunes, no Amazon, no streaming. 3 discs, physical only, available in one place. Music journalists who had spent months predicting the deal would fail wrote corrections the following week with a kind of stunned bewilderment. The conventional wisdom had been so comprehensive, so unanimous, that being wrong about it required a different kind of reckoning. What made the achievement something more than a commercial success was what it demonstrated about the architecture of power in the music industry. For decades, the assumption had been that artists needed platforms more than platforms needed artists. The label, the distributor, the retailer, these were the structures that determined who was heard and how. An artist who walked away from those structures was walking away from their audience. Prince had just walked away from every conventional platform simultaneously and sold 158,000 copies in 7 days through a single chain of stores that sold paper towels and lawn furniture. The ripple moved outward immediately. Jay-Z negotiated an exclusive release with Samsung, bypassing conventional distribution entirely. Taylor Swift would battle Spotify over streaming royalties, using her catalog as leverage. Exclusive deals, previously seen as desperate last resorts, became negotiating tools. Artists began understanding that scarcity, deployed correctly, was not a weakness. It was the most powerful card on the table. None of them had invented this logic. Prince had walked it into a Target conference room, placed a pen on the table, and walked out when they said no. In a conversation with a journalist the following year, Prince was asked about the Target deal in the context of the music industry's ongoing crisis. He gave an answer that was 3 sentences long. "I don't sell music. I build a world and invite people into it. Someone else doesn't get to price the invitation?" The journalist pressed him on the risk. What if Target had never called back? Prince looked at her with an expression that suggested the question had not occurred to him as meaningful. "Then I would have found another way. There's always another way. The only thing that's actually not an option is giving someone else control of what I make." He said it as a statement of fact, not bravado, not philosophy, just the operational reality of a man who had spent 30 years learning, at significant cost, exactly where his lines were and what happened when he held them. The conference room in that Manhattan tower still exists. The table is the same. The chairs are the same. There is nothing on the wall that marks what happened there in February 2009, the moment when one of the most famous musicians in the world stood up, said nothing, and let the silence do the work that arguments could not. But the music exists. 36 tracks across 3 discs, recorded entirely on his own terms, released entirely on his own terms, heard by hundreds of thousands of people who drove to a Target store and paid for a physical object because Prince had decided that was the only version of the story he was willing to tell. And somewhere in the logic of that decision, in the gap between the moment he set the pen down and the moment the phone rang 48 hours later, is a lesson that has nothing to do with music and everything to do with what it means to know your own worth so completely that walking away from the table is not a risk. It is simply the truth. So here is the question this story leaves in the room with you. How many times have you accepted someone else's terms because walking away felt like losing, when the real loss was staying?